Have you ever walked into a room and felt like everyone had already decided who you were, not based on your resume, not based on your voice, but based on the color of your skin or the calluses on your hands? Today's story begins not in a boardroom or a courtroom, but in the back of an old auto shop on the edge of a town that hadn't changed much in 30 years. Oil-stained floors, metal clanks in the distance, the faint hum of an engine someone gave up on. And into that world walked a young woman, soft-spoken with steady eyes and sleeves rolled up. No one knew her name yet, but they saw enough to form a judgment. She's not from around here. She's just some girl trying to play with tools. Probably doesn't know a spark plug from a coffee cup. What they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the fire her father had placed in her hands long ago in a garage not so different from this one. What they didn't know was that this girl had once built engines blindfolded just to prove she could, that she had fixed things most people didn't even know were broken, that under the dirt on her boots was a legacy. But none of that mattered to the man sitting behind the counter. The boss, the kind who smiled when he doubted you, the kind who thought a challenge could put you in your place. He handed her a wrench, pointed to a machine that hadn't roared in years, and said with a chuckle, "Let's see what the mechanic's daughter can do." What happened next left every man in that shop speechless, because sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one whose story you'll never forget. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet gray, the kind of day where the air smells like motor oil in yesterday's rain. The garage sat just off a rural highway, surrounded by nothing but open road and rusted fences. Inside, old engines waited like forgotten puzzles. Men in grease-streaked overalls moved with muscle memory. It was their world. Predictable, familiar. Then the bell above the door jingled. She stepped in brown skin braid tucked into a worn baseball cap, jeans stiff with age but clean. Her boots carried dust not from the sidewalk, but from long mornings under heavy machines. In her hand, a folded-up resume. On her face, something even rarer calm. The men looked up just for a second, long enough to size her up. She wasn't what they expected. Not tall, not loud, and definitely not someone they pictured working side by side with them. The boss, gruff, silver-bearded, leaning back in a chair that squeaked under his weight, raised an eyebrow. "You lost, miss," she smiled politely. "No, sir. I heard you're looking for help." He gave her a once-over, then glanced at the clock like he was already late for something else. "You're the mechanic." "No, sir," she said without pause. "I'm his daughter." That got a few smirks from the corner. Someone coughed to cover a laugh. Another leaned over and muttered something under his breath, something about daddy's girl playing dress-up. But she didn't flinch, because this wasn't the first garage she'd walked into, and it wouldn't be the first time she was underestimated. In fact, it had become something of a pattern. Across America, women, especially black women, enter male-dominated trades every day and are greeted with the same narrowed eyes, the same heavy silence. They carry the weight of proof, of having to be twice as good, twice as fast, and still not taken seriously until something breaks and they're the only ones who can fix it. Her name was Maya, but no one in that garage knew it yet. What they saw was an outsider. What she carried was something none of them could see, a skill passed down from grease-covered hands, a bond built in late nights beside her father's broken-down truck, a hunger not just to fix what was broken, but to be seen. And so she stood there, resume still folded in hand, waiting not for permission, but for a chance. A moment later, the boss leaned forward, pulled a rag from the desk, and tossed it aside. He didn't smile. He didn't welcome her. Instead, he pointed to a dusty, half-stripped engine in the back and said, "If you're really serious, try bringing that thing back to life." It was more a dismissal than an invitation. But she nodded, turned toward the engine, and walked without hesitation. Because sometimes the most unlikely person in the room is the one who came most prepared. And just like that, Maya's quiet journey began against noise, doubt, and the weight of low expectations. Next came the challenge, a machine everyone had given up on, and a girl no one believed in. But that engine was about to meet the wrong impossible. The engine sat like a monument to failure. It was an old V8 block, half disassembled with oil-caked pistons and a seized crankshaft that hadn't turned in years. Rust clung to its corners like barnacles on a shipwreck. A tangle of wires hung over it like forgotten vines. In the world of mechanics, there are machines you fix, and machines you just keep for spare parts. This one, most had already buried it in their minds. That thing, Maya asked quietly. The boss didn't look up. He was already scribbling something in a ledger behind the counter. If you really want to prove something, he muttered, bring that junk back to life. It wasn't a test. Not really. It was more like a shrug, a throwaway challenge, one designed to discourage, not invite. The kind people give when they want you to walk away on your own. See, that engine had been the shop's unsolved riddle for over a year. A delivery truck had come in smoking from the hood and knocking like it was about to throw a piston through the firewall. Several mechanics had taken their shot. Even Gary, the most experienced guy in the shop, spent 2 weekends on it before declaring it mechanically cursed. But Maya didn't blink. She took a slow step toward the engine, laid her resume down on the nearby workbench, and pulled out a hair tie from her pocket. As she tied her braid back, the other mechanics exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "She'll last an hour tops." And yet, Maya didn't rush. She didn't boast. She just pulled on a pair of gloves, grabbed a flashlight, and knelt beside the wreck like it deserved her full respect. There's something powerful about watching someone treat the impossible like it deserves a second chance. In that moment, you could see the difference between her and everyone else. They had tried to conquer the engine. She came to listen to it, to understand it, to ask what had gone wrong and why. And maybe that's the first quiet lesson here. Sometimes the most broken things don't need force. They need patience. All around the country, people throw away what they don't understand: old engines, old people's systems that no longer serve them. But what if we stopped asking, can I fix this, and started asking, why did it break in the first place? Maya knew this wasn't just metal. It was memory, design, years of wear and abuse. This machine had a story, and she intended to read every page. She pulled out a small notebook from her jacket pocket, something her father always taught her to carry. In it were hand-sketched diagrams, torque values, and margin notes only she could read. She began making observations aloud, not for others to hear, but for herself. Crankshafts seized. Might be a bad bearing. Wiring's a mess, but harness looks salvageable. Compression's dead in cylinder 3. The boss glanced up from behind the counter. He didn't say a word, but he watched just long enough to realize she wasn't bluffing. It wasn't about ego for her. It was about the work. And deep down, something about that unsettled him. Because for men like him, used to commanding attention, giving orders, and being the expert, there's something threatening about someone who shows up quietly and knows exactly what they're doing. In that dusty garage, the real engine that day wasn't the one on the workbench. It was Maya, and slowly, she was just beginning to warm up. Now all she needed was time, trust, and a little space to prove that even what's written off as junk still has power left in it. And as she rolled up her sleeves, she knew this wasn't just about fixing an engine, it was about restoring belief. But belief, like any machine, takes work. And the first thing she'd have to repair wasn't metal, it was perception. And that is always the harder part. Before Maya ever held a wrench in that dusty garage, she had already spent years in the quiet corners of another one, smaller, older, and held together more by heart than by hardware. Her father's shop was just 3 bays wide, tucked behind an old gas station on the south side of town. It didn't have fancy lifts or neon signage, just a hand-painted board that read, Turner and Daughter. Honest work since '88. At first, Maya thought the "and daughter" part was just something sweet her dad added. She didn't realize he meant it. He used to wake her at sunrise on Saturdays with the same ritual: a cup of cocoa, an extra set of gloves, and that warm voice saying, time to make the metal talk, baby girl. Maya would sit on an overturned milk crate legs, swinging, watching as he leaned under hoods and disappeared into engines like they were puzzles only he could solve. He didn't speak much when he worked, but she learned to listen in other ways. The rhythm of a socket wrench, the low whistle when he found something tricky, the way his fingers moved like a musician's, always in sync with the story the machine was telling. And every once in a while, when the shop was quiet and business was slow, he'd let her help. At first, it was just handing tools, then holding a flashlight, then pulling parts. then doing it herself. One summer when she was 12, they rebuilt the entire engine of a 1967 Chevy Impala together. He let her pick the paint for the valve covers. She chose a deep plum purple. Not factory, he chuckled, but unforgettable. When they turned the key and it roared to life, her father just nodded and said, "Now you know what it means to bring something back from the dead." But what Maya didn't realize at the time was that her father wasn't just teaching her mechanics. He was teaching her memory, focus, patience, pride. There were no certifications on his wall, no degrees, just calloused hands, a loyal customer base, and a daughter who worshipped him like he hung the moon. She didn't grow up with summer camps or dance recitals. She had grease-stained jeans, cut knuckles, and the quiet confidence of a girl who knew what she could do, even if no one else believed it yet. That's the thing about growing up in the shadows of engines. You learn early that what people see on the outside doesn't always match what's under the hood. And maybe that's the real lesson her father left behind. Not every talent comes with a trophy. Not every genius wears a lab coat. Sometimes the best teachers live in coveralls and smell like gasoline. Years later, when her father passed away, Maya kept his shop key on a chain around her neck. Not as decoration, but as a promise to carry forward the legacy of a man who never doubted her hands, even when the world might. So as she stood there in that unfamiliar garage, sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed on that impossible engine, she wasn't just a girl trying to prove herself. She was a memory in motion, a quiet tribute to a teacher whose classroom was a garage and whose greatest lesson was this: don't fix it to impress them. Fix it because you can. And that's exactly what she was about to do. Because sometimes the knowledge that matters most isn't the kind that comes from books or degrees. It's the kind passed down, grease-stained, whispered between turns of a wrench, and it lives deep in your bones. And now in this new place surrounded by strangers, in doubt, Maya was ready to let that knowledge speak. Not loudly, not angrily, just clearly, one bolt at a time. The engine may not have known her name, but her hands, they remembered everything. The sound started as a chuckle, low, quiet, almost like someone clearing their throat. Then it turned into a snicker. And soon the garage filled with the sound Maya knew all too well, that particular kind of laughter. The kind that doesn't come from humor, but from disbelief. One mechanic nudged another. "Look at her. She's got her little notebook out like she's solving algebra." Another chimed in. "Give it 20 minutes. She'll be calling for help or heading back to wherever she came from." Maya didn't look up. She'd heard it before. In trade school, in interviews, even at parts stores where clerks assumed she was shopping for her boyfriend. And the thing about that kind of laughter, it's not always loud. Sometimes it's a shrug, a roll of the eyes, a question phrased like a compliment. "Wow, you really know your stuff." For a girl, in garages across the country, stories like Maya's aren't rare. What's rare is who sticks around long enough to finish them. There's something deeply human about the way we categorize others. We're wired to make snap judgments, quick conclusions based on what we see, what we've heard, or what we assume. But those assumptions, they can cost us more than we realize. Because every time someone's underestimated, we risk missing out on what they might teach us. Take the story of Brianna Daniels. She became the first Black woman on a NASCAR pit crew in a sport that had never seen anyone who looked like her in that role. When she started training, people laughed. They said she was too small, too slow, too different. Now she changes tires faster than most people blink, and she changed the face of a sport in the process. It's easy to laugh at someone who doesn't fit the picture in your head. Harder to admit that the picture might be wrong. Back in the garage, one of the younger guys, maybe out of boredom or maybe curiosity, walked over to where Maya was working. "You really think you can fix that thing?" he asked. Maya didn't look up. She was tracing a wiring diagram with her finger lips moving slightly as she counted contacts. "I don't think," she said softly. "I know." There was no arrogance in her voice, just certainty, the kind that comes from hours, years of repetition and resolve. And for a brief second, the young man didn't know how to respond, because confidence without ego, that's not what they were used to. And maybe that's the quiet lesson here. Bias doesn't always sound like hate. Sometimes it just sounds like laughter. But if you're not careful, that laughter becomes a wall one that blocks growth, hides brilliance, and keeps you stuck in the familiar. Maya wasn't trying to break the wall down with words. She'd rather take it apart with a wrench, piece by piece, bolt by bolt. Because when the work speaks loud enough, even the doubters have to listen. And as she continued to work, each quiet turn of her tools became a kind of music. The laughter began to fade. But the engine, it was just starting to find its voice. In a world where noise often passes for knowledge, Maya worked in silence. She didn't feel the need to announce what she was doing. No dramatic gestures, no snappy comebacks, no need to prove a point. Just quiet, focused movement, the kind of presence that doesn't demand attention, but quietly earns it. Hour by hour, she dismantled the engine with care. She wasn't in a hurry. Every bolt was labeled, every wire traced and tested. Her father used to say, "Treat every engine like it has a memory. It'll tell you everything if you listen long enough." And Maya listened. Her tools moved like extensions of her hands. The ratchet clicked in rhythm, her socket changes were second nature, and even the way she wiped parts clean had a kind of quiet ritual to it. In her world, silence wasn't absence. It was intention. A few of the guys began to notice. Not openly, just a glance now and then. A slight pause in their lunch break. One even walked by, slowly pretending to look for a wrench he didn't need. Something about the way she moved made them curious. Because while others had attacked the engine with force, Maya approached it with finesse. She used a stethoscope not for show, but to listen to compression. She brought in a multimeter not to impress, but to double-check a bad ground she suspected from the start. She even resoldered a tiny connection that most people would have overlooked. What she was doing wasn't flashy, but it was excellent. And excellence, especially the quiet kind, is hard to ignore. There's a saying in martial arts, the master doesn't speak, the master does. And Maya, without knowing it, embodied that perfectly. She wasn't here to argue about what she could do. She was here, doing it. And maybe that's the lesson the room began to learn, not through a lecture, but by watching her work. Real skill doesn't need to shout. It just shows up. Think about it. The best musicians don't scream over their instruments, they become one with them. The best teachers don't need to dominate the room, they create space for understanding to bloom. And the best mechanics, they let the results speak louder than their resume. Maya's quiet mastery became the rhythm of the day. Even the boss, who hadn't said much since assigning the challenge, walked by more than once. He didn't offer advice. He didn't mock her. He just watched. Something was shifting. Not fast, not loudly, but undeniably. And that's the power of silent excellence. It disarms pride. It interrupts prejudice. It rewrites expectations without ever needing to erase anyone else. As the sun dipped lower and the golden light filtered through the garage windows, Maya wiped her brow and stepped back for a moment. Not because she was done, but because she was mapping her next move. And in that pause, there was a kind of reverence. She hadn't finished fixing the engine yet, but she'd already begun fixing something far more stubborn. The idea that only certain people belong in certain places. She picked up her notebook again, flipped a page, and began sketching. A new plan, a different wiring path, the next stage. Because once the silence has done its work, then it's time to reveal the secret that silence has been protecting all along. And Maya, she had one. And soon, the whole shop would know. They thought they knew her story. To them, she was just the daughter of a mechanic, someone who maybe picked up a trick or two in her dad's garage, someone good with her hands but lacking the credentials, the pedigree, the real experience. But what they didn't know, what Maya never felt the need to advertise, was that under the quiet confidence and oil-stained gloves, there was a whole other life they couldn't see. Maya wasn't just her father's apprentice. She was his legacy, and something more. Back in high school, while her friends were prepping for prom, Maya was building a miniature combustion engine out of scrap parts in her backyard. At 17, she won first place in a statewide mechanical engineering competition, not because she had formal training, but because she spent her nights studying repair manuals and watching university lectures online. She'd been accepted into one of the top engineering schools in the country, full scholarship, letters of recommendation, even a research offer from a private aerospace firm by her sophomore year. But she turned it down. Why? Because the week before orientation, her father collapsed in the garage. a heart condition he'd been hiding for years. No insurance, no backup, just a shop that needed to keep running to stay afloat. So she stayed, picked up the phone, took on the bills, ran the business, and never once regretted it. The truth was, Maya didn't need a fancy title to validate what she knew. She had rebuilt more engines than some graduates ever touched. She had solved problems using instinct most people only learn through simulations, but still she never led with that story. Not because she was ashamed, but because she believed in letting the work speak first. In a world that constantly tells you to sell yourself, Maya held to a quieter truth. You don't have to announce your worth to live it. It's a rare kind of strength, not needing external validation to know you belong. And for women like Maya, especially women of color in technical fields, that strength isn't just admirable, it's necessary. Studies have shown that Black women in STEM often face double invisibility overlooked because of race, underestimated because of gender. Maya had felt both, but instead of chasing visibility, she focused on impact. And that's what made her different. One of the mechanics, Tom, the oldest in the shop, began noticing. "Where'd you learn to do that coil test?" he asked casually. Maya looked up, half-smiled. "Just something I picked up along the way." He paused. "You sure you didn't go to MIT or something?" She didn't answer, just went back to work. Because the real secret wasn't where she had been, it was who she had become in the process. And maybe that's the deeper lesson here. Some people collect degrees, others collect grit, and every now and then someone carries both but chooses to lead with neither. As the last rays of daylight stretched across the garage floor, the engine began to look different. Not new, but alive, like something that had been waiting to breathe again. And Maya, she wasn't finished. Not with the engine, not with the story, because there was still one more thing they hadn't seen. One more truth still tucked beneath the surface. The secret wasn't just her knowledge. It was her reason, the deeper purpose that kept her hands steady, her heart grounded. And that purpose, it was about to come roaring to life. The morning after felt different. There was no grand announcement, no drumroll, just a quiet buzz in the air, like the garage itself could sense that something was about to shift. Maya showed up early as usual, hair tied back, gloves on, notebook in her back pocket. She didn't talk much. She never did. But today, even the silence seemed electric. The engine was ready. It had taken days of steady work, a new timing chain, rebuilt ignition system, custom wiring harness she had soldered herself. Every part had been touched, cleaned, aligned, not rushed but respected. Most people in the shop didn't even realize how far along she was. They figured she'd given up or moved on to something easier. Because when someone works without noise, it's easy to overlook the progress happening right in front of you. Until suddenly, you can't ignore it anymore. She climbed into the driver's seat of the old test truck, slid the key into the ignition, paused. The guys in the shop barely looked up at first until they heard the soft click of the fuel pump priming. Then the low whir of a rebuilt starter spinning effortlessly. And then, boom! The engine turned over and caught with a deep, even rumble. Not just alive, but powerful, smooth, confident. It didn't cough or stutter like it used to. It roared like it had been waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to believe it was still worth saving. For a split second, the garage froze. Someone dropped a wrench. Another guy walked out from the back, wiping his hands, eyes wide. Even the boss stepped out of his office, mouth slightly open. Maya sat there, hands resting lightly on the wheel, letting the engine idle like a heartbeat. No one spoke, because what could they say? She stepped out, left the engine running, and quietly opened her notebook, crossing off the last item on her list. Then finally she looked up. The same mechanics who had smirked and whispered days ago now stood in silence. Some nodded, some just stared. One of them, Tom, the old-timer, smiled, shook his head and muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." And just like that, the room shifted. Not because she demanded respect, but because she earned it. There's a moment rare but unforgettable when assumptions collapse under the weight of undeniable truth. This was that moment. The lesson: respect can't be forced, but it can be earned. And when it is, even the loudest critics fall silent. What Maya had fixed wasn't just an engine. She'd repaired something deeper, the space between judgment and understanding, between doubt and recognition. It wasn't about showing them she was better. It was about showing the work and letting that speak louder than anything else could. As the engine continued to purr in the background, a few guys approached her, this time not with sarcasm or doubt, but with genuine curiosity. What did you do to fix the harness? Where'd you learn that compression test trick? Could you show me that grounding technique later? And Maya? She didn't gloat, didn't rub it in. She just nodded. Sure, because humility doesn't mean shrinking, it means shining without blinding. And as she wiped her hands and reached for her water bottle, the boss finally spoke. Didn't think anyone could bring that thing back, he said, arms crossed. Maya just smiled. Sometimes she replied, it's not the engine that's broken. It's how we look at it. A quiet nod. No argument. And in that small exchange, a heavy wall came down. But this wasn't the end. Because while Maya had fixed the machine, what came next would reveal why she could do what no one else could. And once they understood her why, even the engine's roar would pale in comparison. For the first time in days, the garage felt still. The engine had spoken, loudly, clearly. But now it was the silence that said the most. Maya didn't celebrate. There was no triumphant fist pump, no self-congratulations. She just quietly cleaned her tools as she always had, methodical, present, respectful. But around her something was different. Not the tools, not the parts. The people. Respect had entered the room, not because it had been demanded, but because it had been earned, one bolt, 1 hour, one patient moment at a time. And the one person who seemed to wrestle with it the most was the boss. He stood in the corner now, arms crossed, face unreadable. For days he'd dismissed her, challenged her, treated her not as a potential asset, but as an interruption to the system he was comfortable with. But that system had just been reprogrammed, not with confrontation, with competence. He finally walked over slowly and nodded toward the humming engine. You did good work, he said. Maya looked up, not surprised, not smug, just steady. Thank you, she replied simply. There was a pause, then he added grudgingly, but honestly better than anyone I've had on that thing. Now that meant something, because when someone in power finally recognizes the value they failed to see, when they have to set aside pride and ego to admit they were wrong, that's not weakness. That's humility. And humility, when it shows up honestly, is where real respect begins. The boss didn't offer her a contract, not yet. But he did something more subtle and maybe more meaningful. He asked, you think you'd want to come back tomorrow? There's a diesel that needs diagnosing. That was his version of extending a hand, a quiet invitation. Maya smiled. Sure, I'd like that. Sometimes power doesn't need to be overthrown. It just needs to be reminded gently, persistently of its blind spots. And maybe that's the heart of this part of the story. When those in power are willing to listen to those they once overlooked, everyone gets stronger. We often think of humility as something only the humble need to learn. But the truth is, humility is just as important for the powerful, especially when they built systems, intentionally or not, that shut others out. The garage didn't need a revolution. It needed a recalibration. And Maya didn't storm in to take over. She just showed up to do the work and did it better than anyone expected. And in doing so, she unlocked something bigger than a stuck engine. New kind of leadership, one rooted not in title, but in trust. The guys in the shop started to ask her more questions that day. Not just about the engine, about how she learned what she knew, about what she thought of their setups. One even brought over a wiring diagram for her to look at. It was subtle but real. Because when humility walks into the room, quiet, consistent, undeniable power has a choice: resist it or grow because of it. And the ones who grow, they make space for something greater to unfold. Which brings us to what Maya carried with her all along, something even the boss hadn't seen yet. Not just her hands, not just her skills, but a purpose. And in the next moment, that purpose was about to reveal itself, not through tools, but through a single folded piece of paper that would change everything. By now the shop had shifted, not just the mood, but the meaning of things. The engine wasn't the only thing that had been rebuilt, so had their definition of strength. Strength, it turned out, didn't always look like a broad chest or a booming voice. Sometimes it looked like a young woman, quiet, composed, with grease on her sleeves and conviction in her fingertips. That afternoon, after finishing her notes, Maya pulled out a folded piece of paper from her bag. It was worn at the corners, creased down the middle, and slightly smudged with oil. It wasn't a diploma. It wasn't a certificate. It was a hand-drawn blueprint, an original engine schematic she had designed years ago with her father. A hybrid concept. Simple in form, elegant in function. A system meant to reduce waste heat and increase fuel efficiency in older vehicles. It was never patented, never published. But it worked. And in Maya's hands, it was more than just a drawing. It was a symbol of what could exist when tradition and innovation worked together, of what could happen when someone with deep roots dared to imagine something new. One of the younger mechanics leaned over her shoulder, squinting. "You drew that," Maya nodded. "With my dad. He started it. I finished it. He studied the lines of the symmetry. It's clean, smart. You ever think about taking this to market?" She smiled. "I used to. But sometimes the value isn't in selling it. It's in what it represents." Because for Maya, this wasn't about proving she was smarter than the guys in the shop or better than the boss who doubted her. It was about expanding what people believed was possible. She had grown up being told that real strength meant lifting more, talking, louder, commanding space. But her father taught her that true strength is quiet, unshakable, found in persistence, not posture. And in that garage, she lived that truth without ever needing to shout it. Her blueprint wasn't just mechanical, it was generational. And that's something we rarely talk about when we talk about women in trades, in engineering, in spaces that weren't always built for them. We don't just need more women to enter these fields. We need to change the shape of the field itself so that legacy and innovation, head and heart theory and touch can coexist. Maya had inherited more than just skill. She inherited a mindset: fix what's broken, improve what you touch, and leave something behind that outlasts your name. That's the real blueprint. And it's not just for mechanics. It's for daughters who carry on the quiet dreams of their fathers. It's for women who show up to spaces where they're told they don't belong and make those spaces better. It's for anyone who's ever had to choose between proving themselves and staying true to who they are and found a way to do both. By the time Maya tucked the blueprint away, something had changed. She wasn't the black girl who fixed the impossible engine anymore. She was the woman who walked in with dignity, rewrote expectations with grace, and left behind a new model for what power, skill, and womanhood could look like when they're allowed to breathe. The day was winding down. The tools were being cleaned. The shop lights dimmed slightly as evening settled in. But Maya, she wasn't done yet, because the final part of this story wasn't about engines or respect. It was about legacy and how the quiet strength of one woman could ripple far beyond that garage floor. The sun dipped low behind the shop's tin roof, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Tools were hung, lights dimmed, and in the gentle hush that followed a full day's work, Maya stood quietly, her bag slung over one shoulder, the hum of the engine still faintly echoing in the background. No applause, no grand send-off, just a moment. And sometimes, that's all you need. Because what Maya walked away with couldn't be boxed up or printed on a certificate. It wasn't about a job offer, though one was coming. It wasn't about the nods of respect, though they meant something. It was about something deeper: dignity. Not the kind people hand you because they feel obligated, but the kind you build piece by piece through quiet resilience, unwavering patience, and unshakable purpose. Maya never came in demanding space. She created space through action, not noise. She didn't wait to be acknowledged. She showed up ready and let the work tell her story. That's the kind of dignity that can't be taken away because it was never given in the first place. It was proven. We live in a world where people often mistake visibility for value, where voices are expected to be loud to be heard. But Maya proved something else. You don't need to shout when you've already earned your place. Her story reminds us of others who've walked a similar path, like Katherine Johnson at NASA, who quietly calculated flight paths that sent astronauts to space while being forced to use a separate bathroom because of her skin color. She didn't protest with signs. She protested by being indispensable, and that's what Maya had become. Not just capable, but undeniable. As she turned to leave, the boss followed her to the door. He didn't say much, just handed her a fresh badge with her name printed on it. "Looks like we've got a spot on the team," he said. She took it gently. I'll think about it. She smiled. And that's when he knew she wasn't walking away because she was angry. She was walking away because she could. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do, especially when the world expects you to beg for a seat, is to stand up and walk with your head held high. That's what dignity looks like. It's not a reaction. It's a posture. And as Maya stepped out into the cool evening air, the sound of the engine behind her still purring steady, she didn't just leave with her skills or her pride. She left with something far greater. The quiet knowledge that she had changed something. Not just the machine, but the minds in the room. And maybe if they were paying attention, their hearts too. Because when dignity enters quietly and stays long enough to finish what it started, it leaves behind a blueprint. Not for engines, but for how we see each other, how we value each other. And that is a legacy worth leaving. And maybe, just maybe, this story reminded you of someone you know, someone quietly strong, someone overlooked but never outmatched. Or maybe it reminded you of yourself. So if you've ever walked into a room and felt like you didn't belong, remember Maya. And remember this, dignity isn't something they give you. It's something you bring with you every single day. If this story moved you, made you think, or made you feel seen, let us know in the comments, have you ever been underestimated and proved them wrong? Hit that like button if you believe quiet strength can be louder than any voice. Subscribe to That Person Was Me for more true powerful stories of resilience, justice, and the people who rewrite the rules without ever raising their voice. Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more Maya.